Welcome to the Pulse Experience, the podcast that takes you on a journey of wellness at the intersection of technology and human experience. I'm your host, Edward Beltran, CEO of Fierce and innovator of Pulse. Stress is a very large problem today. It's costing organizations $300 billion annually, not to mention the impact on our people and the individuals in our companies. And often we don't know what's causing our stress. And if we do, we don't know the proper, most impactful way to handle it. Instead, we're used to just accepting stress and managing it at a general level, such as with better diet, better sleep, exercise, or meditation. But this doesn't get underneath the root issues of our stress or eliminate them. And today, there's so much that's required of us at both our homes and the workplace that we don't always have the tools to be able to be self-aware and tackle these stressors. However, our bodies, they don't lie. They tell us constantly what's happening. They're responding to our environments, and it's our job to listen. And when we handle these challenges and take them head on, they drive positive results in both our personal and our professional lives. Pulse is our proprietary app that integrates with wearable devices and infuses cutting-edge science to be able to show you who you're with and where you're at when you're experiencing stress by the hour. Then we wrap context around these events by pulling in calendar and GPS data to be able to further drive that self-awareness. And more importantly, move into action with either a live coach or the in-app AI bot to be able to tackle these stressors, drive your resilience higher, as well as the outcomes you desire in your lives. We call this biometric intelligence. Our certified coaches walk into every coaching session with these same biometric data and insights to be able to help you identify the themes that are going to have the most impact on your lives and tackle those toughest challenges. This transformation is the Pulse Experience. Welcome, everyone. I'm Edward Beltran, host of the Fierce Experience, and we're so lucky and happy to have Scott Winter on to talk today about his background and the amazing things he's doing with Pulse. He's the CEO of Brain Friendly Dynamics, which for the longest time, he's used neuroscience and performance management in order to help people thrive. And the way he describes it is he's just an ordinary average guy trying to make the world a better place. Scott, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So before we go, I want to share a very interesting story of how Scott and I met, actually. So, Scott, I'm going to start it off, and I would love you to take over from your point of view. So I was on a flight home after attending one of our industry conferences back in February, March of this year, 2023. And I was sitting there with my son, and I was working on a presentation I had later that week, a couple of days later, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and I look over, and there's Scott in the aisleway introducing himself with a very nice smile, very friendly demeanor, and just a very inquisitive approach. Scott?
So, yeah, I saw you working on your slide deck, and I was familiar. I'm a Fierce facilitator. I've been with you guys as a facilitator for some other clients. And I'd been paying attention to your emails around Pulse, and I had just finished doing a similar project with some first responders, and it really piqued my interest. And so I didn't know that you were the CEO at the time, and I said, hey, this is the stuff that I'm doing, and love to learn more. And here we are. So it's been a fun journey, and appreciate your openness and your willingness to really collaborate in this space, because I think what you're doing with Pulse is really the future of where we're going with learning and development. So I'm really appreciative of your guys' work and the technology that you guys are integrating. So.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And thank you for being so passionate about what you do, to where what you saw on my slide deck, right, piqued your interest. And, we had a fantastic conversation about wearables and technology, but most importantly, your background around neuroscience and just performance impact, which I want to dissect here a little bit further in our conversation. Sure. But to start off, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit more about your background, your expertise as a coach, as a facilitator. What are you most passionate about, Scott? What has made you get up in the morning just excited for your day?
So, I've been doing this work really since high school in terms of leadership development and collaboration and facilitation, and it really started in student government. And then I worked for a nonprofit in the Bay Area, in California, and did work all over the world, just bringing people together to really solve their own issues, right? So we're all over the world and doing community development work and seeing what happens when a group of people come together with a focus and to get something amazing done and seeing it then follow all the way through. So I've always been really passionate about tapping into the potential of both individuals and teams. So I would say since, the 80s, I've been doing this kind of work, and I've kind of feel like I'm Forrest Gump because opportunities keep running into you. I mean, these opportunities, there's that Louis Pasteur says, chance favors the prepared mind. So I'm so really focused on it. So I live now in Chico, California, near where the Camp Fire occurred back in 2018. As you know, the town of Paradise was destroyed literally overnight. Over 14,000 homes were destroyed, 30,000 people were displaced. And so as a result of my previous work in the development space, I was asked to help work on developing some resiliency within the fire recovery space and the Campfire Collaborative. And so, where I've kind of transitioned and where this technology really comes into play, I think where I'm really focusing on right now is really how to build resiliency, right? So, my view is, stress is about when demand exceeds capacity. And I think my work now is really increasing capacity to meet those demands through two ways. One is helping the individual understand how they're wired, how they work. So there's that cognitive literacy, kind of understanding how they work so they can really show up. And then it's that collaboration space. So if we're really going to meet the demands, and so I do a lot of work in the resiliency space, and I call it the 3 R's of resiliency. It's about readiness, it's about response, and it's about recovery, right? So, how are we helping individuals and organizations and communities get really ready for the impending challenges that are really in front of us right now? So we could talk about a community resiliency, but I think it's very relevant for individuals as well. Like, am I ready for today? Right? I got a lot to do. Am I ready? So what can I do for myself instead of having such a large to-do list? What is my to-be list? Like, how do I need to be while I'm doing all these things? And so it's about state management. And so when we walk into a crisis, when we walk into something, that I can bring out the best in you and you can bring out the best in me because we are calm, we're alert, we're focused, we make good decisions. And then when it's done, we take care of ourselves as well, because a lot of people in the fire recovery space really have been burned out, and we got to keep them healthy, keep them focused. So that's a little bit about what I've been doing.
I love it, Scott. I love it. And, your passion, right, always comes through in every conversation we have. And I want to dissect some of these themes that you bring up a little bit thoroughly because I find them so intriguing, obviously, right? That's why we're working together. So you mentioned the Paradise Campfire and then stepping kind of in this fire recovery space and your passion around resilience. We've seen resilience pop up a lot more in our common nomenclature. Can you tell us a little bit more kind of about that and why you think those trends are coming true?
Well, it's a great question. I think, in addition to the campfire, and then we got hit by COVID. And so over the last few years during COVID, I was working with some sports psychologists, some ex-military folks, helping people really navigate the challenges that are in front of them. And, was working with some folks in the flow science space, getting performance science, getting people into flow. And kind of my view of it is, when you look at the continuum from trauma to being in that state of flow, it's all state management. And so getting people to really recognize and putting them back in control, because for me, during the campfire, I just remember sitting in my home and just feeling completely helpless, right? And so I became a search and rescue volunteer because I never want to feel like I can't go out and make a difference in something. And so part of what we're trying to do when we talk about resiliency is give people that sense of agency that they have control, because the number one cause of stress in our nervous system is feeling helpless, right? So you tie that, whether that be in at work, in my community, in a situation. And again, I think that's part of what I love about what you guys have been creating with Pulse is like, look, you have more agency, you have more choice, you have more control. So let's start to help create some self-awareness, some awareness around others, and give yourself some new options, because it's our nervous systems that are really driving much of what we do. And so that neural health is really going to be critical. So when we talk about getting these first responders and other people in really in tune, is like, if we're dropping like flies because we can't cope with what's going on, we have to develop some new muscles. And I just think, again, my experience has been by teaching people how they work and how they could show up, get ready for the challenges, really get in tune with how they need to show up, embody that cognition, if you will, so that when it does happen, they perform at their optimal, right? And again, they make sense of it when they're done and they take care of themselves. And so there is a cycle to it in my mind. And I think
Yeah.
having good feedback in terms of what my body's saying is really critical. So.
Absolutely, Scott. Wow, that was absolutely amazing, and I love that. I love that visual, and I want to just kind of paint that again and reiterate, Scott. As you said, you're a ordinary, average guy trying to make an impact on everyone's lives, but I love that example of the campfires were happening, you were in lockdown, you felt helpless, so you're like, I don't like this feeling. I have to do something about it. I'm going to volunteer. I mean, that's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I think, though, that too is an analogy of what we're trying to do with Pulse, what you're trying to do in your work, which is you have this feeling why, right? And there's obviously management techniques, right? That's why I ride my bike 30 miles a day and do 400 push-ups when sales don't look like they're going to come through like we anticipate. But that's just the bridge, right? That's just the bridge to action, right? Tell us a little bit more about that, Scott, just because, I'm so intrigued with this and the cycle that you're looking to build.
So like in flow science, there are stages of flow. You have what's called the struggle phase. And I think what's interesting about that one, Ed, and what I discovered through COVID and informing people, because I work with a lot of high performers out there, a lot of really smart people, physicians and, economists and PhD people. And I think what was really fascinating for me was helping them recognize that to struggle is part of the process. Like struggling is not an option. And I think what happens for a lot of us, if we're struggling, we get into a certain mindset, like there's something wrong with me, I can't cope. So what we try to do is normalize the struggle. And once you accept the struggle, you can move into kind of this idea of the second phase of flow is this idea of you have the struggle, you have kind of acceptance of it, right? So you have to accept the struggle, and then you move into that flow state, and then you move into recovery. So we really focused on how to struggle more effectively and how to recover more efficiently. And I think, all of this is about what are the practices that I'm living by and working by. One of the sayings that really resonates with me is this idea of whatever I do, I get better at, right? And so it's really, what are the practices that's going to set me up to step into this moment, right? And so as a search and rescue volunteer, we do a lot of practice so that we are ready. We're calm and we're alert, because my safety, my team's safety, the potential victim's safety is all predicated on how we keep our mindset and our state involved. This is important because when we start talking about the biofeedback tool, this is where I go geeky on you. But there's a lot of research right now where we're talking about how do we help people down-regulate after a traumatic experience, right? And so there's such a high peak in stress. And this is where, again, understanding heart rate variability is so critical, right? It's because heart rate variability is really the indication of how well your body can handle stress, right? And so the higher your heart rate variability is, the better I am at able to cope with certain situations in my environment. There's a really interesting paper that came out trying to figure out the connection between heart rate variability and what was the term? This idea of allostatic load, right? So the allostatic, which is the amount of stress on your body over time. And what they found is in law enforcement, for example, people with lower HRV had slower reaction times, right? When maybe I need to be more responsive. And so in terms of decision making, and then take it back into normal life, how many executives, how many parents, how many teachers, for example, are making poor choices because it's not the external environment that they're reacting to, it's the internal environment that they just haven't developed that capacity to handle the life stress. So again, there's it sounds overly complex, but it's actually quite simple. It's developing self-awareness, giving people a sense of choice, and then being able to apply those choices in new ways, but really be clear what they want and have the right mindset to do it.
Well, that's amazing, Scott. And just for our audience as well. So I typically follow Bill Gates' reading list. There's always, different books on there that I'm like, hey, I never would have read that. And I read them. I'm like, wow, this is intriguing. So I have a new reading list called the Scott Winter reading list. That's kind of more of a live, ongoing feed. And I read it. It's absolutely fabulous. Scott, I highly recommend you publish your reading list. I think it's intriguing, and with all seriousness. Let's talk a little bit about flow a little bit more.
Sure.
So I think it's really intriguing. Accept the struggle. We don't hear that in the common nomenclature, right? Synonymous with resilience. Now, that's typically my problem with the definition of resilience is that it sounds so simple, right? Just, bounce back, toughness. Like, what does that mean though? And so just in your
Well,
definition of, yeah,
yeah,
please.
it's a great question. I mean, one of the things that people make up is that, and resiliency is not about taking the stress away. If you're really going to build resiliency, you actually add more stress to the system, right? But I think there's a kind of a conversation that's happening nationwide that if there's something wrong, then I need to go flee for a bit, that I can't, the idea of grit, for example. And I'm not saying that bad things aren't happening to people and people aren't really struggling, but the human body has tremendous capacity to bounce back from hardship. And so I think we've kind of created a there, and I don't mean to be, insensitive to people's challenges. But I remember even after 9/11, how helpless and how I just had, I had a young child at the time. And yet I look at an image of the destruction of London after World War II, and there's a mom and a child standing there. I'm assuming, I don't know who it was specifically. And I'm like, man, we as human beings have a tremendous capacity to bounce back from real hardship. And so to take those lessons to know that we as human beings have that capacity is amazing. And I want people to understand that you have more choice, you have more agency. So I think resiliency, as I said, it is a practice. It is, really saying, how do I want to be showing up in these situations? Am I even aware of the types of situations? And I think this is really relevant now in corporate America, because there was a lot of, I was working with an executive team just the other day, and they're like, hey, we are facing an existential crisis, right? And so what does that mean in terms of when we come into the room and have to think together, but each one of us are all stressed out in our own certain way. But if we could be calm with each other and we're focused on the right stuff, instead of focusing on the problem, that we're really focusing on what we want to address the problem, I think it opens up a whole level of innovation and tech and possibilities that aren't there. Because the reality is there's a lot of companies saying, how do we develop that resiliency in our staff? And you're seeing it with, back to work policies and organizations. I think we have a lot of work to do. The dust has not settled as a result of COVID. And so I think we have to develop a level of practice in ourselves with how we lead people. So we have these organizations that can be resilient, because it takes, to your point, in Butte County, we have a food system collaborative, we have a mental health collaborative, and we're bringing people together, and we're working through these major challenges so that we can actually build a community that can thrive. And I think it could be applicable in an organization, it could be applicable in a family, and so that's really the focus. Is like, we have to understand what we have the capacity to do, and we struggle better together. I was working with a healthcare system after the, in Fort Myers after the hurricane last year, and again they bounced back really well. But we were working with them, and it's about how do you struggle better together. You learn in community, you heal in community, and I think we can't lose sight of the fact that why do we come together in a crisis, right? But why aren't we proactive at coming together before those things occur so that we are ready? And that's what we're doing here in California to help communities really bounce back, or at least prepare for floods, fire, extreme heat, a lot of the things that are really kind of starting to impact us as a community. And those same factors, I think, are impacting companies as well. And I think we need to address that proactively.
Yeah, that's amazing, Scott. You're right. These natural disasters, they're just going to come, right? And it goes back to the frame that you shared with us, which is struggling is part of the process. Accept the struggle and recover quickly, right? That's just absolutely amazing. The other thing that I love that you said that I use often is it's how do we? I love that frame, right? How do we? Because that's what I say our job is as executives, as business people, as community members. How do we solve this, right? And I just really love that concept, Scott, of something's coming, right? It's par for the course. Right. And how do you build the muscle today and be ready for it?
Well, and it's interesting on that point, because again, our brains are prediction machines, right? We're making predictions all the time about what we need to do when we step into a situation. The problem is we take all of our past experiences into that new situation that we never experienced. And so a lot of times executives and C-suite folks get caught up in their own kind of algorithm, and they're applying old problem solving models to new challenges. And I think we have to be able to understand that, look, we have to think worst case scenario, right? And say, what do we do if these things occur? How do I need to show up? What's my role going to be? How are we going to engage with our staff, with our communities, with our, collective partners, whatever it might be? But, one of the key things is we're not anticipating it. And I'm not trying to, create fear in people. We need to be ready. That's why, to me, readiness is the through line. And that's why the resiliency is so important. So if I'm ready, then it can respond in a way that's going to be effective for my own health and safety and maybe impact in the company. And then recovery is, okay, what do we learn and how do we adapt really quickly for the next potential one, right? So, and that could be exhausting if we're not practicing a lot of the tools that Pulse gives us the data from or the biofeedback. So I'm a religious, I look at, I used to be an ultra runner. So I used to, before all the technology, I would just check my heart rate. If it was, I wake up, if it was a 50 in the morning when I woke up, I know that I'm just going to take it easy. But if I wake up, it's a 30, I'm going to run 20 miles. So, your body tells you what you can do. And mindset's really critical for all of this because, people who, I hear this all the time. I was working with somebody, you probably hear too, over workload. Like the issue of workload right now is really significant. A lot of people are like, we're just really overwhelmed. And there's an interesting data point that shows that people who are in stressful jobs and feel that their stress is bad for them increases their mortality by like 40%. So mindset is a big part of how we relate to our environment. So again, I'm like I said earlier, it's not just about having my to-do list. I have a lot to do. My question is, how do I want to be as I tackle this challenge? I want to be calm. I want to be alert. I want to be in flow. And so there are ways I get myself into that through breath, through movement, through, good sleep. There's a lot of basic hygiene things that we could be doing for ourselves to set ourselves up to be effective in my role as a leader, in my role as a parent, et cetera, right?
Oh, that's great, Scott. Thank you so much. So that's just incredible background into what you're doing and your knowledge base and what you're doing to help people thrive. So let's talk a little bit then about the bridge between your work, what you're passionate about for getting people ready, whether it's the C-suite or whether it's within community support and Pulse. How do the two things come together? How does the foundation of Pulse help your vision and your passion?
Well, I think part of what intrigued me by it was, so I work with a large sporting entity, and my son was working with them doing athlete monitoring, right? And so and you think about how much money we spend on helping athletes perform at a high level. I was trying to figure out what the number is. It's billions of dollars, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, in the athlete monitoring program, they were basically using, a software, and the athletes had to put in, their calories, their sleep, their HRV, how they felt, their mood, how they felt physically, how they felt mentally. And all that data would then determine how much they would do in their training the next day, right? And again, if their heart rate variability was low, but they felt good, the coach would still say, we're going to take it easy because we don't want you to get injured, right? And I'm thinking, gosh, we spend all this money for athletes, but what are we doing for the teacher, the medical professional, the executive, the computer programmer, all these people that, day to day that have no understanding of the value of using biofeedback. So the bridge for me has been, seeing Pulse as a way to help people understand the information that their body's telling them. I mean, that book, Your Body Keeps the Score. I mean, there is a truth to that. And so getting an understanding, again, that cognitive literacy, so that I can get back into control of myself instead of blaming the external world for what I'm feeling. Understand that what I'm feeling is really a tool for me to say, okay, I can do this instead, or I can do this instead. And I think that's part of really understanding. I mean, a lot of people get overwhelmed with the data. It's like, just simplify it. If your heart rate variability is low, give yourself permission to take some breaks, more breaks that day, do more breath practice, do a little more movement, drink some water. There are ways that we can down regulate pretty well, so we can meet the moment, right? And that's really the idea, is helping people and then develop a set of practices. I mean, to me, it's about practice. Again, there's a great book that just came out by George Mumford. He was the sports psychologist for the Bulls, and his whole thing is, you got to chop wood and carry water. You got to do the reps. And if we're not willing to do the reps, there is no pill. There is no cure. It's an inside out job. And so, if my body is telling me something, then I need to know how I use that data for good, rather than get worked up and wrap myself around axle. Like, I'm getting so stressed out. It's like, yeah, okay. And It's like, because
Yeah.
it's at that moment, if I have no choice, then I feel helpless again. And so we're just trying to give people that sense of agency, and say, I do have an impact. And then how can I be calm in your presence when you're maybe going there? And how can I just be a good listener? Because again, the best state of flow is having conversations with people. So just
Totally.
what
Totally.
does the fear say? The conversation is the relationship, right? So
That's
what kind
right.
of relationship do I want to have with you? What kind of relationship do we want to have with our customers? What kind of relationship do I want to have with myself? And that really starts there, because ultimately that's, I want to feel this when I'm stepping into this role. So to me, that's kind of
That's
the way I kind of look at it.
That's the release valve, Scott, for 100%. And for those of you who are listening closely, another example of the Scott Winter reading list. So I highly recommend you take a look at that. What was the,
George,
what was that?
it's
Yeah.
It's the author is George Mumford, and it's called Unstuck.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's, it's a good one. I like it's simple.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. A lot of the stuff is very basic. Like
Yeah.
even in the, we have the community resiliency model in that we use, and it's based on this woman's research, and it's like self-awareness. It starts with self-awareness, and it's like, it's shift and stay. It's like move your attention from one part of your body to another. I mean, there's just some basic practices that help people really embody that sense of being in control. So.
Absolutely. Scott, I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with Pulse Embedded going forward. But before we do
Yep.
that, I do want to illustrate something that you said and tease this out a little bit, right? This concept of HRV, heart rate variability, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
the science behind how your body's reacting. It's more than just your heart rate. It's actually your variability, your heart rates. They come into more predictable intervals when you're stressed, and when you're relaxed, they're a little bit less predictable. So what I find interesting is that I've been a Fitbit wearer for many, many years, and I've always had the HRV data point. And it's kind of one of those things like I don't really know what to do with it, right? I mean, I'm always monitoring time and heart rate zones. I was monitoring my output relative to my heart rate, right? Because I could see kind of improvements, if you will, and make adjustments. What we're doing in Pulse, which I think is very important, and you said it, is we want to make it simple and actionable. So one of the things
Right.
that we've done that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, so I'll let you talk a little bit about this and how it matches up with your work as well, is we're actually, instead of one data point per day or an aggregate data point for a week, we're looking at it by the hour, right? And we're
Right.
making it so simple. Instead of a number where you're like, well, what is this? I don't know, it's counterintuitive. we're categorizing it into 4 categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 being the highest. Tell us a little bit more about that and how it helps make things actionable for your learners.
Well, as people become more fluent with their body and understanding the nervous system, right? If I'm at a 4 at 2 p.m. every day, start to unpack what's going on in those moments,
Mm-hmm.
and then give people the tools to be able to, again, get ready for that 2 p.m. meeting. And it might be with my really difficult coworker or boss or whatever it might be. And so we like to get people, you name it to tame it, and to say, well, what can you do instead? Because in the context of the fierce tools, for example, we're really dealing with the social domains, and social is one of the elements of the wellness wheel, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it could be a number of other things as well. Maybe they're not eating. Maybe there's some other behaviors. And so by really being able to get granular with the course of their day, because it comes down to circadian rhythms and other things as well. So really help people start to design their day so they can see shifts. So we did a program for first responders, a 12-week protocol. First 6 weeks were on these pillars, and then the second 6 weeks were just, again, the practice. And it was just and what we try to illustrate is just really simple strategies that are proven in science that help people get back into control, that move from that sympathetic to the parasympathetic in our nervous system. And so, the nice thing about Pulse is seeing what's going on. And so, for example, if I'm having peaks of stress in my sleep, for example, maybe it's because I had coffee at 4 p.m., right? And we know that you want to cut off caffeine before noon if you want to go into deep sleep, for example. So, there's so much that we could build upon Pulse in terms of developing, again, that intellectual or that cognitive literacy, or whatever people want to use to say it. But it's like creating that level of awareness to say, in this moment, this is a pattern. And so, again, let's stop dealing with the symptom. Let's start dealing with maybe some of those structural underlying issues. It could be a relationship. It could be, my nutrition. It could be I'm not getting enough sleep. It might be I'm dehydrated. I mean, there's any number of factors that go into HRV. The nice thing
Absolutely.
about Pulse, it's about relational stuff, right? So,
Yeah, absolutely. And then to your point, being able to granulate to get surgical around, what's happening. So Scott, let's talk a little bit about your use of Pulse in the new course that you built called Resolute Rooted in Resilience. I understand it's a 6-week course. You're launching it. Your people are very happy about it. Tell us a little bit about this course.
yeah, so it's really so I partnered with a local therapist here in Butte County, partly because I do feel that the power of Pulse is really in community, in groups, right? And I think we can move mountains just like we did with some of the first responders. Again, you heal in community, you thrive in community. So we really are building it more of a community pool where people are open. And so the way we work is it's really like a 7 week. So week 0 is really about getting people focused on where they want to go, kind of deal with this, get the really strong signal in terms of what they want to focus on. And then we have these 6 pillars around mindset, right? So that's officially week 1. Week 2 is about emotional regulation, and we give tools. And it's really just an overlay, just kind of a review of here's what's available, right? Because it's like there's a lot of potential knowledge for them. Week 3 is social support and well-being. We know that when people are struggling, if they are getting depressed about it, they isolate themselves, which then creates more stress. So we really try to get people to understand the power of social. Week 4 is around problem solving and adaptability and giving tools for that. And what we're doing is we're just orientating people. And then again, it's about the other 6 weeks is to say practice. So we want to, working with the app, they could say, I'm going to be very purposeful about what I want to do afterwards. Because again, we're going to provide information. People are going to have their own revelations and maybe just focus on one thing so they can start seeing shifts over time, because it's not going to happen overnight. Mm-hmm. And we're introducing new behaviors that people generally don't do. Week 5 is optimizing self-care. And there are simple things like light exposure, like going on a walk early in the morning as you're getting that early sunrise, and then walking at night to watch the sunset. And that's basically telling your brain, through light, for example, that it's time to downregulate. So you could get your circadian rhythm in play, in check, by just walking in the morning and walking. That's just one simple strategy, right? There's a number of elements. And then the last one is around meaning and purpose. And just really start to get people to be curious with their feelings. And, I worked with Wim Hof, who's the Iceman, right? And one of the things that he said many years ago was to feel is to understand. And so instead of getting freaked out about what I'm feeling, make sense of it so it can be of service to me, right? Because, and then start to broaden my vocabulary to say, instead of saying I'm stressed, I'm mad or whatever, broaden it. Like, hey, I'm feeling a little uncertain, and then where am I feeling it in my body? Really start to use some more somatic work, because again, we're all connected. I mean, our brains and our bodies are one and the same through that vagus nerve, right? So
that's amazing, Scott. Thank you. And again, the course is called Resolute Rooted in Resilience. Fierce is embedded. It's the tool to be able to help understand what's happening in real time and to be able to support the course and the coursework. Scott, absolutely amazing. Scott, before we break, I just want to hear how you think about the future with technology, with what we're coining as biometric intelligence, which is really wrapped around self-awareness, a lot of these elements.
I think it also goes back to what I said at the very beginning. I think the work is, when we think about the demands that are coming our way, and you think about your role as a CEO, you're a dad, you're an executive, you're a leader, you're a spouse, you're a kid, you have, how many roles do you play, right? You have a ton of roles, and these roles start to tug at each other, right? So you have a lot of demands. And so by you being able to understand how you work and how you need to show up in each of those roles more effectively, odds are maybe you can increase your own capacity. And I think that's where the future is like really understanding how our bodies work. So as I said earlier, we can tap into our true potential. I think of the chemistry. It's all chemistry. If you think of what we are built on, a lot of people are looking outside, for the pill. And it's like, man, we have the chemistry to kind of put ourselves in that state where it can be high performing. In that flow state, if you're in a state of flow and you're 5 times more productive, man, just think we could be working 1 day a week and get as much done as we would do in 5 days when we're not in a state of flow. And so, again, we're still kind of scratching the surface. There's a lot of research that's being done. And I think the nice thing about Pulse is you guys are kind of rooting it in research. You have a pretty good research team. And, you're curious as well. And I think as an executive, your willingness to try new things and experiment with this stuff, because that's ultimately what it's about. It's N equals one. You run the experiment on yourself. What works for you may not work for me. And that's okay. But then we can come together as a group and talk about and to see where it's going and to know, it's okay to struggle. The first sign of learning is agitation, is struggle. So embrace the struggle and then let's work through it through understanding how we work. And then let's work together to make it better. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. I love that. Embrace the struggle. Struggle's part of the process. Just accepting that as the first part of the battle. I love it. And I also want to point out something that you mentioned, right, is that we are passionate about this work. We feel very strongly in the approach, but it's the application, like what you and your company are doing, that's important to us, to partner with people that are doing amazing things out there, such as yourself, Scott. And there's a prime example of that. Scott, you and I have had numerous conversations, and every conversation I walk away with a ton of knowledge along with more on my reading list. But I got to tell you, I'm really appreciative that you took the time to speak with us. We're going to have you on again as we start launching these products and impacting more lives. But I can't thank you enough, Scott.
Well, I thank you, Ed, for trusting us, because it's one thing in what you're doing at Fierce. Fierce. My experience at Fierce has always been one of my favorite things to be a part of teaching and integrating into the work that I do. But you're demonstrating, I think, what people need to be doing. More organizations, we need to be flexible, we need to be agile, we need to kind of be able to meet the moment by not being afraid to try new things. And so I really appreciate the kind of the explorative spirit that you hold and your team holds. It's just been phenomenal. Your team has been great. So
love it, Scott. Looking forward to having you back on again. Scott Winter, CEO of Brain Friendly Dynamics. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening.